Welcome to the second video in this series where we're building this website from scratch. In the first video, we built out the HTML for this. It's looking a bit drab. It's now time to add in the CSS. So in this video, we will focus on the CSS for the mobile view. We're gonna do mobile first. All right, so I'm gonna start, I chose to start this time with the fonts. There's a lot of different things you can start with. It doesn't really matter. You kind of choose which piece you want to start with. We're going to be working one bit at a time to move this website closer and closer to this design image that we're aiming for. So for the fonts, the specification that the designer gave me is that we're going to use sans serif font for everything except for this unicorn's header, which is going to be cursive, the H1. Okay, so remember in our reference we do have some information here about fonts. The common CSS properties and units section shows that font family lets us select our typeface, aka our font, for the text. So there's a few different examples here of what we're going to use, and you can see that sans serif and cursive also, it's not listed here, but they're both categories of fonts, so actually we can just use them out of the box without any extra trouble. So it's a very basic website as far as fonts go. So let's see, it says use font family. So that applies to everything. The cool thing about font is that it's one of the inherited properties. What that means is that if I set the font on the body element, everything inside of that is also going to get that font. So I don't have to go and set the font on every single individual item. I can just set it on the body and it'll cascade to everything. So I'm going to head over to my code. Let's get that CSS rolling. So I could say body. That's the best way to reference like the whole page. The element, this is actually referencing the body element here. You can see that's kind of on the outside of everything else. So we're going to say font family sans serif is what the instruction said. And if we head back to our page, actually it already has. When I saved it, it applied the sans serif font to the entire page. So right now every single thing is sans serif. But we don't want that. We want everything except for the unicorn's heading. The H1 should be cursive. And that's okay. We can override just for the H1 and say font family is cursive. Okay. So with those two rules in place, it worked. That one's cursive, everything else is sans serif. Now remember, which kind of selector am I using here to target these? I'm using the element selector. We have also in our guide, CSS selectors, here it is. The element selector is where you just give the name of the element and it'll say, hey, every single H1 on the page, or every single paragraph on the page gets a certain style. So that's what I just used there. All right, next thing I'm seeing is that also everything on this page is centered. So you may recall from the material in Unit 1 about centering. There's a couple ways to center, but in this case we're centering text. So the best way to center text usually is just to say, again we'll do it in the body because really every single thing is centered here. Text align center. So that automatically will apply to everything on the page. Sweet. All right, next step. Let's have a look at the background. I think getting this background color in here will really make things start to come together. So this is an interesting background. We have some rules here from our designer. It says our background should be this color. But actually you don't see that color because it's overlaid with this linear gradient. This is kind of like the backup color in case the linear gradient fails. Maybe it's an older browser or something that doesn't have linear gradients. So you won't actually see this one most of the time. You're going to see our actual linear gradient. Now, a linear gradient is not something that we taught you how to do. In fact, it's not even something that I do often enough to have it memorized, so I'm going to have to look that one up. Like I said before, never be afraid to look things up on the internet. CSS, linear gradient. Okay, we got a couple options here. We got the Mozilla Developer org, that's a good one. We also have W3 Schools, also a good one. I usually go with W3 Schools, so let's check that one out. Nice. So we got an example here. We can just say linear gradient and pick some colors. Let's see if there's more examples. Okay, here's another example. You would, in real life, you would want to read through this article. I'm kind of going quickly here because for sake of time. But you can also see that you have the option of specifying a direction and then some colors. So to right, to bottom right, you can specify the direction in degrees, an angle, and then list multiple colors. So this should work just fine because our designer has given us a gradient that has a direction in degrees and then 4 different colors. So why don't I kind of copy one of these examples. Notice in this example it says hashtag grad. That's a selector. That's identifying what element to add the background to. But I know that in my case I want to add the background to my body tag. So I can skip that part. I just need to copy this part here, the actual property. So that's pretty important when you're searching. You might have to, you're gonna have to take the example you find online. You have to know kind of which part of it you need and which part you don't need. And then also we'll have to tweak it once we copy it over. So copy this over. I'm gonna put it inside my body selector again. Let's go over to the design. And there are 4 different colors here that we need. Not red and blue. So I'm going to change that part to my first color. My second color. Third, and my final color. Oops, that should be a comma. Okay, and it says 180 degrees here, but our designer says give me 235 degrees, so I'll just change that. Okay, and technically, since the designer asked me to put in a backup background color, I'm going to do that as well. But again, we won't actually have to see that in our case. Okay, awesome. Let's see how that worked for us. Wow, okay, that did work. Definitely worked. Okay, cool. So we got our background on our page. Looks good. Next, let's start tackling these different sections. I think the sections also really kind of make it pop, or maybe the font color. We'll do both. Okay, so I'm going to work from the top. My header section, let's kind of tackle that section first. So that section, it's all right except for the color of the text. So let me go over to my code. And I need to target this, all the text inside this header and make it white. So let's go ahead and, again, use our element selector. So if you don't know which property turns text color white, you would just search online for CSS text color, or our cheat sheet has that one as well. Color here. So multiple ways to find your answers. So we got that one turned. I think we're done with that. It's time to move on to the next section. So we see that this next section, a couple things, has a white background, which really makes it stand out. And the text is not actually black. It is, like it says here, the text color should be either white, like this section, or we're going to use this color for some of the sections. So let's target this section here. In HTML, that one is a section. So I could start by just saying we want the section to be, background color, white, but the text color is going to be this slightly purple shade, very dark purple. And okay, yeah. So that's good. With one problem, when I applied that background and text color to that section, it actually applied it to all the sections. This section, and that's not how it's supposed to be. This section, the second section here, is not actually supposed to have a white background. If we look at the diagram, the first section has a white background, the second one doesn't. The third one has white background, and the final one is also transparent. So what this means to me is that my rule here that says, hey, section, background color white, that's not specific enough. I don't want to turn all of the sections. So this is where we're going to start to use some of our other CSS selectors. So remember we just use the element selector. We can also use a class selector, ID selector, or some combinations. In our case, we can pretty much stick with element selectors and class selectors most of the time. Sometimes we use a combination. So let's head over and try a class selector. That means I have to go to my HTML, and it gives me a way to target this section. Okay, so say, hey, this section here should have a white background. And while I'm at it, I also know that, okay, this first section has a white background. This section does not have a white background, but this third section does have a white background. So I can apply that same class to both of those. And then in my CSS, instead of this rule, I'm going to a different rule. Dot white section. All right. So we're using the dot in front when we use a class selector, and then the name of the class that we specified in that attribute. So with that change, let's go see what we got. Okay, looks like we're doing a little bit better. We do have the white section, the clear section, the white section, the clear section. So we got that coloration correct. It does look like these are supposed to be white text as well, so we should probably go back and change that. It kind of makes me think the easiest thing again might just be to apply white text color to the entire page. And then these two sections here and here will be the exceptions to that rule. This is where my mind is going right now. So I'm going to change the text color for the whole body to a white text, and I don't need this anymore. So everything's white text except for the white sections where the colors are reversed. Sweet. This is looking much better. Okay. Next thing I want to tackle, I think we can really make this look on point if we fix some of the spacing, right? So there's a couple things wrong with our spacing here. First of all, there's this kind of edge over here where the background is showing through. So our section doesn't go all the way to the edge. We'll have to figure out why that is and fix that. And then also if you look at the design, let's look at the design here. There's the spacing. These don't go quite up to the edge, right? See how this is touching the edge here? The text comes right up to the edge. That's not how it is in this design here. So we'll have to figure out what we want to do with that. I do want to tackle, well, let's tackle the, let's tackle the outside border first. So let's refresh ourselves on another thing in the cheat sheet, which is the box model. Okay, so when we're dealing with spacing, we have to remember that each of these elements on our page, including this white section here, has its content. That's the actual text. In this case, the text is part of the content. The image is also part of the content. There's padding. Then there's the border. And then there's margin that goes outside the element. So we can inspect this actually. This is a very useful thing to do. Ooh, that's drastic. Okay. So what I did there was, you can right-click anything on the page, like this image, for example, and pick the inspect option. Now this option is available in Chrome. If you were in a different browser, they pretty much all have that option, but sometimes you have to tweak your settings to enable that option. But in Chrome, the inspect is on. I think in Safari, you have to enable developer tools before you can use it. And I'm not sure about the other browsers. But I can inspect that image, and you can see that it shows me. Here, let me rearrange this a little bit so it's easier to see. Okay, excellent. You can see that it shows me that image. And when I hover it, you can see it, there's the code for the image. Hovering it highlights the image in blue. Same with the section. When I hover over that section, it highlights it in blue. And if I click on it, it'll give me some information about the layout here. Not there. Here, at the bottom. Okay, it shows me that here's the size of it. This is the content. That's that blue area. Here's the padding. It has no padding. It has no border, and it has no margin. So what that tells me is that this bit of space here is not actually part of the section. It's coming from outside the section. In fact, I can right-click in that little space and do inspect and find out what that is. Okay, that's just coming from my whole page, interestingly. So the best thing to do is to target the body here. Oh yeah, look at this. The body has an 8-pixel margin all the way around it. And you can see that when I hover that, it actually highlights in orange on the page over here, that space that we want to get rid of. So to solve this problem, we're going to change the margin of the body from 8 to 0. So 8 is kind of the default margin that comes with it. But we can change it if we want to. So I'm going to go here, make a new line. I'm going to say margin 0. Save that, go back, and there we go. We have successfully gotten our sections to kind of go all the way to the edge of the page. Okay. Now the other thing we wanted to tackle here similarly was if we inspect our section. Right now, we do want to add some space at the top and on the sides and also on the bottom. So let's figure out what that's going to look like for us. We have to ask ourselves, do we want that to be border, padding, or margin? So border, it's not usually that. It's either margin on the outside of the element or padding on the inside. In this case, we definitely want padding on the inside. Let me show you how it would be different. If I take this section, oh, here's a cool thing about Chrome. You can actually take this section and modify. You can customize the element right here. So I can say margin, let's say 20 pixels. Let's see what that does. Okay, so margin added 20 pixels on the outside of my section, which was not that great. That's kind of taking us backwards. But if we change this to padding, Will it let me? No. Okay, that padding gives us some space inside of our section around our text. So padding is what we want. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my actual Visual Studio Code. Oops, that's not what I want. I want to apply this to every section on my page. And I want to add a padding of 32 pixels. Actually, yeah, I want 32 pixels. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that's good. Nice 32 pixel padding there, there, and there. If we compare that to our design, yeah, looks pretty much correct. Pretty much like the design. So I believe the next thing we're going to want to look at is the button here. There's definitely a couple things we need to tweak on that because our button currently looks pretty bland and gray. So let's get started on that. Looks like it has a white border, a pink background, white text, rounded corners. So let's get started. I believe our design does give us the background color for that button. So first of all, we'll just target the button. We only have one button on our page, so it's fine just to say, hey, all buttons, give it a text color and a background color. And a border. Let's go over and look at the cheat sheet for borders. So for borders, we can set the border width, the border style, the border color, or we can use a shortcut to set all of them in one. So just three things: width, style, color. Let's go ahead and use the shortcut this time. This is going to be 2 pixel wide. It's going to be a solid. And then the color is going to be white. Okay, let's go ahead and see how that looks for us. Okay. Comparing it to the design, got a couple things. Got some rounded corners. The text should be bold, and then some extra space around here. So let's just do the rounded borders. I happen to know that is border radius. I don't know what size of border radius I need, so I'm going to start with 20 pixels, and we can go back and tweak that until it looks right. But font weight bold. So let's see what that looks like. Okay. Oh, you know what? Before I do the font, the radius, it'll be good to put that padding in so we can get a good sense for how big those rounded corners should be. So let's go back and add some padding. Remember, the margin would be out here, outside. Of course, this is our border, and then the padding is a space in here. So I definitely want padding. I can specify different padding on each side, which I need to do here because you can see that there's a little bit more padding on the left and the right than there is on the top and the bottom. So definitely want to specify individual padding. Or there's actually a shortcut, again, where you can specify all 4 different sides in one line. But I think for now I'll just do the separate ones. And you can kind of look into it on your own, how you can shorten that up. So let's add that padding. I'm going to use EMs here. EM is a unit of measure, as you can find in our cheat sheet again. EM, a unit equal to the current font size. So that'll be helpful to us because if the user decides to change their font size, it would be good if the button kind of matches the current font size. So EM might be a good unit to use here. Let's finish this. We saw that it was maybe a little bit less on the top and the bottom. So let's try that on for size. Okay. Yeah, I think we're pretty close. Actually, you know what, one more thing, the font size here. One thing about buttons is their font size defaults to being a little bit smaller. So I'm going to reset the font size to just the regular font size using 1EM. And yeah. Cool. So let's now go ahead and tweak it. I'm going to inspect that button. Chrome DevTools lets me then modify all these individual styles until I get them just right. So let's start with that border radius. 20 pixels I think was too much. Those are too curved if you compare it to the diagram. They should be just a little bit curved. So I can try different numbers here. And actually, what's even amazingly cool about Chrome DevTools, if you just hit the up arrow and the down arrow, it will change that number. And you can watch it live over here as that number goes up and as that number goes down. You can kind of tweak it until you get just the right angle. I like this one. I think this is at 7 pixels here. That looks like the diagram to me. So remember, any changes you make here in DevTools, it's nice for experimenting, but as soon as I refresh the page, they're gone. Those changes don't last. It's just temporary. So I need to go back and make the real change to my code to match. Yeah, and I actually think I might tweak these a little too. Yeah, that looks really good. Okay, so we got our button. The last thing I want to tackle in this video is this table. It's looking pretty good, but I noticed a couple differences in the design. One is that there is this little light underline here under the headers, header row. And also, all these cells are left aligned. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to, ours, they're centered. So we need to fix that, and then there's no underline. So let's go ahead and fix that in our code. I'm gonna target the whole table. And whereas most of our page is gonna be text align center up here in our body, we're gonna make an exception and say, except for the table. In the table, text align left. Okay, so we got that change. Then that underline. So it's not actually an underline. It's actually a border on the table heading cells. Remember that in our HTML for our table, we have these rows, TRs, and then we have these THs for the cells in the one row and TDs for the other cells in the bottom of the table. So if we target the THs and put a border beneath them, solid, and actually our designer has given us the exact color for this, so let's go grab that. A solid 2-pixel border on the bottom. Let's see how that looks. Cool. Looks good. I think though there's one other thing I do want to change, and that is the padding. If you look at the padding here, our design, there's a little bit of padding around him. So let's go ahead and add that in. Okay, so I'm using a shortcut here to say the top and the bottom padding are 0.8, left and right padding are 0.3 EM. And I actually need that to apply not only to my header cells, I need to apply to all my cells, so let me make a rule for that as well. Cool, works for me. All right, so we have pretty much gotten this design. I think there's a couple things maybe from a few pixels off here and there. We can kind of tweak it and get it just right, but that's enough for this video. In the next video, the last video, we're going to look at the desktop view. So the desktop view is we're going to figure out how to get these two to be side by side for larger screens. And I think there's some padding differences and maybe a font size difference. So I will see you guys back here for the last video.